Welcome back. Join me while I break down another movie plot. Enjoy the memories and watch out for spoilers.
Crocodiles can't swim in salt water.
That'll be your little secret.
The film begins atop Black Lake in Aroostook County, where Fish and Game Officer Walt is being assisted in his duties by Sheriff Hank. The divers come to Maine to research beavers when he has a brief scare by one of the locals. He finds movement in the nest, when suddenly he gets yanked back underwater by something unseen. Atop the serene lake, Walt breaks the silence screaming for help while being dragged through the water. He manages to make it back to the boat, but Hank only retrieves his torso, leaving him to wonder what just tore poor Walt in half. Shortly after, another wildlife officer named Jack stops by to check on the body, while getting on Hank's nerves with all of his sarcasm. Down in New York at the American Museum of Natural History, paleontologist Kelley Scott spends her days examining dinosaurs while wallowing in the recent breakup from her boyfriend. Her co-worker Myra breaks the news that she's the woman he left her for, as he is shown to also be both of them's boss. As an excuse to get rid of Kelley, Kevin tells her about the attack in Maine and says a prehistoric tooth was found still lodged in Walt's remains. Despite Kelley's objections and her insisting that she's allergic to timber, she's stuck on a rickety plane and flown upstate. She gets to the Aroostook morgue to inspect the tooth with Hank and pretends to be a lot braver than she actually is. They discover that the shard of tooth is indeed prehistoric but isn't a fossil. Against Hank's warning that she shouldn't, Kelley asks to see what's left of Walt, leaving her mortified but also curious to visit the lake. While picking up supplies, and his lightweight forward area air device unit, which Hank says can one-shot anything, he tells Kelley that only an old couple live out by the lake and that no one's ever gone missing before. Jack meets up with them and insists Kelley not come for her own safety, but she doesn't listen, as the townspeople are now shown to be spreading stories of a monster in Black Lake that rips men in half. Investigating the incident, they go across the lake to the Bickerman farm owned by the sweet Delores. She tells them that her husband died 2 years ago, but when asked if he was swallowed, she says that she euthanized him, that he was suffering chronic pain, so she bludgeoned him with a skillet and buried him out back.
Well, dig him up if you don't believe me, Sherlock.
They travel to a nearby campsite as Kelley makes mention of the lake's eerily still appearance, which Jack says was originally going to be called Lake Placid, but the name was taken. On the way, Kelley begins to win the sheriff over even more when they come across a severed moose head and she begins slapping him for throwing it at her feet. While setting up camp, Kelley meets a female deputy named Sharon, which makes her feel safer that the men won't get all turned up like in Deliverance. Jack wonders why the museum would send someone just to look at a tooth, especially considering she's already done her job and is still hanging around. Just then they're interrupted by an amphibious helicopter that Kelley says belongs to a mythology professor who travels the world swimming with crocodiles. Thinking that the monster must be a croc that's just migrated further north than usual, crocodile enthusiast Hector joins the party.
Come on.
The next day, Kelley, Hank and Jack go with Hector in canoes to scan the lake for any signs of the creature, when coming across a large school of perch jumping because of something beneath. Suddenly, Kelley and Hank's canoes flipped head over heels and the two are thrown into the lake. They race to get their legs out of the water, but it ends up being nothing more than a scare and they make it back safe. Kelley tries calling more wildlife experts, but no one believes their story without any confirmation, even with Sharon having found Walt's toe washed up on the bank near their camp.
Is this the man who was killed?
Just before nightfall, Hank finds deputies Burke and Stevens digging a trap, having been paid $500 each by Hector, who's currently having a party inside the tents with the rest of the search team. When Hank breaks it up, he's told it's all in the hopes of attracting the crocodile to their vibrations, while also hoping to mate with Sharon. That night before bed, Jack tells Kelley that in light of the recent canoe flippage that it'd be best she stay on shore when they begin to argue again. Kelley finally explains about her boss dating her friend at work and her not wanting to return to New York, but when asked why specifically she chose to stay at the lake, she says she's just genuinely interested, while the two are also shown to be interested in each other. In the middle of the night, Hank steps out to take a leak when hearing rustling in the bushes. Armed and ready to fire, he finds Hector lurking in the scrubs, having just been setting up a spring trap. When asked if the team can trust him, Kelley says Hector believes crocodiles to be gods, which to his defense more cultures have worshipped crocs throughout history than Jesus, and he's also the best trapper on hand. Early in the morning, 5 go out with the intention of tranquilizing it underwater, as Hector says crocodiles don't see well when under and prefer to attack outside of it. Burke parks up as Hector and Jack go into the lake to search, while Kelley lowers a speaker to attract crocodiles, and Hank wonders what the hell they're even doing there. During the dive, they find the carcass of a half-eaten cow as Jack briefly spots the tail of the creature swimming away. The boat suddenly yanked, tossing Kelley out, and gets towed across the lake. Burke pulls the anchor up once the croc spits it out, but Hank notices the perch start jumping by Kelley and they race back to pick her up. Just as she makes it inside the boat, Jack pops up and they drag him in as well. Hector gets helped inside the boat by the whole team as Burke retrieves the speaker, when the massive croc instantly swipes the deputy's head clean off without anyone even seeing it. Later on, Hector attempts to console the sheriff over his officer's death, when Hank is for a second time caught up in one of his traps. When freed, Hank chases him through the woods until getting held back by Jack, when all of a sudden a large brown bear shows up as Jack protects Kelley and Hank squares up with it, when the 30 feet salty bursts from the water and latches onto it from behind, dragging it kicking into the black waters. Hank finally admits that the creature's a crocodile, which they discover to be an Asian Pacific that's made its way across the ocean. After Hector, feeling threatened by the sheriff, challenges him to a fight, Hank hits some sense into him with a single punch and the two leave together, continuing their bickering. Kelley treats a scratch Jack sustained from tackling her when he notices that she's having the best time of her life. Since a man's head was just bitten off, she worries that it shows, but says that she's never experienced anything exciting in her life. The next day, Hector and Sharon head to an area of the lake he suspects to be the creature's nest, while the rest of the team take plaster molds of its footprints. After a brief scare where Burke's severed head gets flung out of the bushes at Kelley, Jack spots Delores bringing one of her dairy cows blindfolded to the giant croc. She slaps it on the butt and the monster gets his meal, which she tells police that she's been doing for the past 6 years. One night it followed her husband home from a camping trip and they threw it scraps for the next 4 years. 2 years ago, when her husband got between it and a runaway horse, it ate him, and she's been lying to the authorities ever since. She justifies it by saying that it's the creature's lake now, as Hector's shown to be putting his scuba gear on, and Sharon says everything she can to convince him not to go in. As he returns to the surface unsuccessful in his search, Hector's confronted by his reptilian god in a placid state, having just been fed. He slowly maneuvers his way back to his chopper, praying to Sobek, as Sharon is warned not to fire her gun due to its strong hide. Distracting it with an inflatable raft, Hector makes it on board, but the croc latches onto the chopper, requiring Sharon to give it one to the face. Back at camp, Hector's almost arrested for putting an officer's life at risk. Later on, he tells Kelley that in ancient times people would be thrown to crocodiles to be judged. If the croc wasn't hungry enough to eat them, they were worthy, though he says he is never going back in Black Lake again. Jack and Hank plan to let wildlife officers kill the croc when they arrive, telling Kelley that they've never caught anything over 30 feet and that it's already taken a life, but Hector suggests that he lure it out onto land and tranquilize it instead. He convinces Jack with the ecological significance that the beast is over 150 years old and swam here from another continent, and Hank with the promise of getting to use his big gun should anything go wrong. They take one of Dolores's cattle against her wishes and dangle it from the helicopter as bait, while Stevens is left listening to her tell him how she hopes the croc swallows his friends whole. Dipping the cow like a teabag into the lake, Jack's team set up on shore with tranquilizers and nets ready to catch it. After a few hours, they begin to give up hope, when it soon appears on Hector's radar. He leads it towards the bank, and when it lunges at the cow, Hector pulls up, allowing fisheries to get a shot on it, but the cow breaks loose and the shift in weight sends the chopper crashing into the lake. Hector survives, but the croc startles him off, causing Hank to run into the water to get a better shot on it, but it springs up in front of him and chases him onto land. He escapes on the back of a truck, but they remain to help the rest of the team, as Kelley's almost eaten, but Jack distracts it with his revolver. The croc's tail hits Kelley into the lake and then begins to chase her back into the water. She swims underneath, making it difficult for the croc to see, and avoids it behind a large snag. Then as it's chomping down on the log, she swims up to the surface and onto the down chopper. It leaps from the water and attacks them, but gets itself trapped in the helicopter as Kelley and Hector swim back to shore. It thrashes around as Hank debates whether to shoot it like Jack says or let it live like Hector argues. He decides to let it live as the tranks begin to kick in and the creature becomes placid. When suddenly a smaller croc attacks Hector from behind, but he gets free. When it emerges again, Hank blows it up with a single shot, sending pieces scattering everywhere. Arriving at just the right time, wildlife takes the neutralized croc away on the back of a truck to figure out what to do with it, as Bessie is shown to have survived the traumatic ordeal. Kelley says goodbye to the much more friendly Hank as he goes with Hector to the hospital, leaving Jack with Kelley, who just awkwardly shakes her hand and walks to his truck. Now much more assertive, Kelley decides to make the first move and asks for a ride, and the two continue bickering all the way back to town. 1 week later at the Bickerman farm, Delores is shown sitting on her pier feeding breadcrumbs to some baby crocodiles, revealing that the two adults had bred. And the movie ends.
Never heard of a crocodile crossing an ocean.
Well, they conceal information like that in books.
If I had a dick, this is where I'd tell you to suck it.
So you made it. I appreciate your time. I couldn't have done it without you. Tell your mother I said thanks.